So today we're starting a new series for our Christmas series and our Christmas season called Who's Naughty or Nice. You guys all should know, I would imagine most of you know where this comes from. We'll just, kind of work with me here. He's making a list. He's checking it twice. He's going to find out. Not bad. Some of you even sang it. I love it. Think about this song. Like, these lyrics are crazy to me when you think about it. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good. So, some of you sang it again. I love it. That's awesome. I wasn't expecting that. That's awesome. So be good for goodness sake. I don't know about you, but he sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good. We all know that this song comes from, or these lyrics come to us from Santa Claus is Coming to Town. But I think, at least for some of us, the view that we have of God, like this kind of feels a little bit like God to us, right? At least the version that many of us were perhaps raised on, or we were taught. It kind of is like that creepy version of God. And the reality is, we're going to talk about this a little bit over the next few weeks, but the reality is that whether you put yourself on the naughty list or the nice list this year, whatever list you would put yourself on, the reality is that every single one of us in this room, we all have our stuff. We've all got our stuff that we're working through. And here's why we're talking about this. If you grew up in church or you have some church experience in the past, maybe you're back for the first time in church in a while. Maybe you're here today with friends because you knew it was the holiday Christmas season and you're just kind of hanging out with friends or with your family members. And that's the case for you today. Regardless, if you grew up in church or you have any church experience, we all tend, especially around this time of year, we all have a tendency to make the Bible stories that we tell, especially to kids, when we tell these Bible stories to kids, we tend to make them safer, and we tend to try and, pretty them up a little bit. We try to make them a little bit less messy than the stories really were, And to some degree, prettying it up and making it safer, it makes sense because let's just be real. Some of the stories in the Bible are not great stories for kids. We don't tell all the stories in the Bible in our kids' areas, right? In our kids' environments, because, it makes sense. We do that to some degree. But it's unfortunate when we continue to do that as adults. It's unfortunate when we continue to make them safer and prettier as adults. And if you've ever struggled with faith, or if you struggle with the church or with the idea of Christianity or God or the Bible especially, then you get this to some degree. But if we can actually understand the Bible for what it truly is, then there's actually less pressure on every single one of us to make the Bible stories less messy. If you understand what the point of the Bible is, there's less pressure there to clean it up and to make it safer. Because the Bible is not just simply a book of moral lessons by which to live. The Bible is not just simply, it's more than a spiritual guidebook for us. It's partially those things, sure, but mostly, if you see the Bible for what it really is, the Bible really is mostly just history. Or to be more specific, or to kind of put a little bit of a creative spin on this word, the Bible is his story. See how I did that? Yeah. See what I did there? It's the story of God. It's the story of Jesus connecting with and intertwining with your story and with my story. It's the story of history, God throughout history, connecting his story to yours and to mine. And there are probably stories, I would venture to guess that for all of us, if you've ever read some of the stories in Scripture and in the Bible, whether you're a Christian or not, whether you consider yourself a church person or not, a religious person or not, there's probably stories in the Bible that you could relate to. That you hear those stories and you're like, yeah, that sounds like me. That's how I feel. I get that. Like, I understand why they did that. Or, you can relate to a lot of those things. Maybe you can't relate to all of the stories, but throughout the Bible are just examples of just the common human experience throughout all of history. And what's interesting is most of it, or all of it, is the common human experience as experienced by ancient people. People that lived in a time and in a period that you and I, we don't really understand what it was like to live at that time. We have no idea. When the Bible was written and most of this ancient history was written, these people were struggling to survive, literally struggling to survive. You think you're struggling to survive to make ends meet. They literally struggled to survive. There was lack of food in some parts of the world at that time. They had to fear actual enemies. You think that that coworker at work is a pain in your rear end. They had actual enemies that could come at any time, like bring their armies to their city and pillage and plunder and kill all men, women, and children. They had real enemies. They had to fear death at any time. They could get a disease tomorrow and be dead by Wednesday. Like they had to live in real fear. They had to live in fear of famines. And so as we study the Bible for what it really is, what we really truly discover is that it's ancient history with a God-given purpose. It's ancient history with a God-given purpose for you and for me, for every single person in every age and every season of life. But what we tend to do is we try to take the Bible and we try to tame it a little bit. We kind of tame it down a little bit. We try to explain the Bible. We try to explain the God of the Old Testament, especially to make it less messy, for kids when we're telling those stories, or to make it less messy for other people who have they struggle with understanding or accepting Scripture. But instead of trying to tame it down, what we should do is we should appreciate it. We should have an appreciation for what the Bible is, because it actually paints a picture of a very messy world, the mess that God chose to enter into as a human being to bring about your redemption and to bring about my redemption through Jesus and what he did for us. The messy stories of the Bible should actually make every single one of us in this room grateful for what it is that God did on your behalf and on my behalf and on the world's behalf. And so, in light of that, it's actually no surprise that when the New Testament authors began to write their documents, the New Testament, by the way, is the second half of our Bibles. It starts with Matthew and into Mark, Luke, and John, the four Gospels. When these New Testament authors sat down to write their documents, it shouldn't surprise us. And by the way, I just want to mention this. When they sat down to write these documents, these guys were not sitting down going, you know what, I'm writing Scripture that's going to stand the test of time for all of time. They just wanted to sit down and document their own experience so that other people could know what it is that God had done in the world. But when they sat down to do that, it doesn't surprise us, or it shouldn't surprise us, that they wrote it and called it, they themselves called it good news. That's what gospel means. They're like, this is really good news. It's such good news that God does not need to be explained. We don't have to try and explain God, and we don't have to try and make excuses for God's Old Testament behavior. We don't have to try and explain that away, because this is good, really good news. And the reason we don't have to explain it is because in the Old Testament, God was playing by the rules of the kingdoms of this world. He was just playing by the rules of the kingdoms of this world in order to prepare the world for a king and for a kingdom that is not of this world. That's not just good news. That's very good news. That's really, really incredibly good news. And if the version of Christianity that you've experienced or that you comes to mind for you when you think of Christianity is, if it doesn't feel like very good news to you, then it's possible that maybe you've heard the wrong news, because the gospel writers are like, this is really good news. And if you read the Bible and read through it as history, it actually contains a very simple message. Human beings, humanity, we messed everything up. We messed up everything. And God moved in such a way in order to cause things to form and fix things in such a way so that when everything was exactly the way God wanted it, at that time, Paul says, when God had everything exactly the way he wanted it, a child was born. One of Jesus' close friends, John, who wrote the Gospel of John, he says it this way. He says, the Word, and when he says Word, he's referring to God. He's like, the Word, God, became flesh. God himself became a man, like a child, a baby. A child was born. And he lived among us, and he suffered like us, and he died for you and for me. And John's like, I was there. I experienced it for myself. There was another man that was there for most of this as well, that experienced it for himself. He ended up writing his own gospel from his own experience with Jesus, and that man's name was Matthew. And after Jesus had been here on this earth and had gone throughout his ministry and shared his message with us, and then he lived his life, and he died on the cross, and then he rose again from the dead, Matthew knew years later, he's like, I got to write this down. I got to write this down for everybody to hear it. This is so good. This is such good news. This is so important. Everybody needs to hear this. And Matthew, similarly to the way that Luke starts his gospel, Matthew starts his gospel with the birth of Jesus. He just does it a little bit differently. You're all probably familiar with the Christmas story as it is in Luke, specifically Luke chapter 2. Matthew starts with the birth of Jesus as well. Now, it's possible, we're going to actually jump a little ways into the Gospel of Matthew, because I think, this is just speculation, but it's possible that Matthew actually started, when he sat down to write, he started with verse 18. Matthew 1:18, he said this is how the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph. And then again, this is just speculation, but then at that point, it's possible that Matthew was like, oops, hold on. I got to back up for just a second, because I've just jumped right into this thing, and I need to set this up a little bit better. I got a more appropriate place to introduce this story. And so he starts in a different place. It's like he pulled out a blank page. He's like, we're gonna make that page 2. Let's go to page 1 here. And the thing that he actually starts with, to us today as modern readers, it feels a little odd that he would start here. The beginning of the entire New Testament, Matthew being the first book of the New Testament, the beginning of the whole New Testament begins with a genealogy, an extensive, long genealogy. Now, one of the things that I learned in my New Testament class when I was in college, and I also learned this I studied this to a greater degree through my ordination process years ago. Each one of the gospel writers had like an intended audience that they were writing to and an intended purpose for which they were writing. They all kind of had a different purpose and a different audience. And Matthew, he begins with a genealogy. And the reason for this is because Matthew is writing specifically to Jewish readers. His audience that he primarily wanted to write to was Jewish people. He wanted the Jewish people to know that Jesus was the Messiah that they had been waiting for. He wanted them to know that he had descended from a king, that he had the right to call himself the king and the Messiah because of the prophecies that he fulfilled. So Matthew focuses a lot on those prophecies throughout his gospel. And that's why he starts with this genealogy. Now for me, I'm just going to be honest with you. When I read, the last few years, I've read the New Testament in a year, like the last 3 or 4 or 5 years in a row. I'll be honest with you. When I get to Matthew, I usually just skip this part. Like I don't actually read, out loud in my head every single one of these names, because who cares, right? Like who in the world cares about all of these people? But Matthew, he wants us to care. He wants us to care about these people. This is not just filler. It's not like his publisher reached out to him and was like, we need more words, Matthew. You're going to have to fill a couple more pages, for this book. No, it's not just filler. This is like the point of the story for Matthew. And so he lists over 40 generations, 42 to be exact, 14 generations times 3. He lists over 40 generations that begin with Abraham on down to David, all the way down to Joseph, as in Mary and Joseph, the father and mother of Jesus. And every once in a while in this genealogy, as he lists it out, Matthew blends in some of that good news with some of the, why in the world are they included on this list? Bad news throughout this whole thing. In fact, along the way, he interrupts some of his own thoughts so that we don't miss it, in order to highlight some of the embarrassing parts of Jesus' ancestry, some of the embarrassing parts of Jesus' family, which was such a big deal for his audience, because again, he's writing to Jews, and Jewish people, they emphasize the ideas of perfection. They were all about perfection and cleanliness and morality and following the laws and following the rules. And Matthew highlights throughout this genealogy the imperfect people, the impure people, the immoral people, the lawless people, which begs the question, why? Why in the world did Matthew do this? And again, we have to speculate a little bit, but I think a really good possible reason that Matthew did this is in order to highlight the whole point of why Jesus came in the first place. He came for those of us that are on the naughty list, and that includes me. And by the way, that includes you. I don't mean any offense, but he came for all of us on the naughty list. And so here is where Matthew actually starts. He pulls out a blank page. He's like, we're going to start over. Hold on. Pulls out a blank page. This is Matthew's version of the Christmas story, starting in verse 1. This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah. Now, again, he's writing to Jewish people. He's going to, over the next several chapters of this document he's writing, he's going to prove to them that Jesus is the Messiah. He's not hiding his purpose from verse 1. He's making it very clear. He's going to make a case that Jesus is God's anointed king. He says this is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And then he starts the part that you and I, we tend to just kind of gloss over. We just kind of skip over it. He says this: Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Here's kind of our first, little hiccup. He's listing names, just generation after generation. This is the first little hiccup. It's not a huge hiccup, but it's a little one. And as he says this, Judah and his brothers, his Jewish audience would have immediately thought of their Jewish scriptures, the Old Testament. They would have went all the way back to the beginning and the story of Jacob's 12 sons, one of which was Judah. He had Judah, and then he had 11 others. Now, if you're familiar with the list of 12 sons, and if you and I could go back in history and we could pick one of the people in the lineage of Jesus, I promise you, you would not have picked Judah as the guy that was an ancestor of Jesus. You wouldn't have picked him. In fact, Judah might have been the worst option on the entire list. You would have picked, and I would have picked, Joseph. Not Mary and Joseph, the other Joseph, right? Dad's favorite, if you know the story. He had a coat of many colors. He got that coat from his dad because he was dad's favorite of the 12. His other brothers, because of this, they hated him. Judah and his other brothers, they decided to put Joseph in a pit so that he would die. They wanted him to die. And then they had plans to go back and tell their dad, hey, he was mauled by an animal and he's dead. That's Judah. We would have picked Joseph. And Judah's like, hold on, guys, hold up. Instead of letting Joseph die, why don't we sell him and make some money off of this? Like, that's even better, right? He comes up with that idea. So they sell Joseph as a slave. They're like, who cares what happens to Joseph? Well, if you fast forward through the story, quite a ways to the story, Joseph eventually has worked his way up in Egypt, and Joseph ends up eventually saving his family, saving Judah and his brothers from a famine that comes across the entire land. So if you're going to pick somebody that's, down the road is going to be the savior of all mankind, you would have picked the brother that saved his family, right? You would have picked Joseph. And Matthew's like, hey, this is too important for us to miss. He wants us to pause in the story at this moment. He wants us to ask the question, why Judah? Of all people, why Judah? Jacob, the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah. Why two names here? Well, we're going to get there. I'll tell you why. Whose mother, now there's a woman in the mix. So far, we've just mentioned a whole bunch of men. Now there's a woman. And by the way, in Jewish culture, they did not typically reference women. And I know that we don't really get this today, but they don't usually reference the women. Like they were less than in their culture. And, Jesus came and turned the tables on that, by the way. But Matthew he's really trying to get our attention. He wants us to take note in this moment. He says, whose mother was Tamar. Now, his audience would have immediately thought of the scandal of Judah and Tamar. And you probably don't know that story. Why? Because this is not one of those stories that we typically tell in kids' church. This is not a story that we tell in Sunday school. This isn't even a story that we typically would tell here in big church. But Matthew's like, hey, you can't skip over the ugly parts of this story. You can't skip over the naughty people on the list on your way to Jesus. That's the whole point. Jesus came for the naughty people. Regardless of what you've done, regardless of what we've done, he's come for those people as well. He wants us to note this story of Judah and Tamar. And since none of you know it, I'm going to tell it to you today. So here's how the story goes. If you go back to Genesis, Judah got a wife for Awesome name, by the way. Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and this is just the way it worked in their culture. Basically, the fathers picked the spouses for their kids. He went out and found somebody. He's like, yep, here you go. There's your wife. Congratulations. And her name was Tamar. So this is how Tamar ends up in the line of Jesus' ancestors. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. No explanation. That's it. Feels like a great Christmas story so far, doesn't it? Lovely. Judah, as a result of this, because dies, Judah hands Tamar off to his second-born son, Onan. Guess what? Onan dies. And Judah, he still wants some offspring. And so he decides he's going to give Tamar to his younger son, Shelah. But Shelah at this point is too young. He's not ready to be married yet. And so Judah sends Tamar on home to go be with her family so that she can mourn the losses of her first two husbands while she waits for his youngest son to grow up. Well, eventually Shelah does grow up. And Judah decides, change my mind. Don't think I'm going to actually pass him off to you now. And Tamar, as a result of this, is very hurt. She's very angry. The reason for this is because in their culture, the customs of their culture were basically like, if he doesn't give me Shelah to be married to, I have no opportunity to have a child. Because the only opportunity, the only chance she had was to have a child in that family that she was originally married into. And so she's hurt and she's angry. Years go by. Eventually, Judah's wife dies as well. And so Tamar, she decides to hatch a plan. And this is where the crazy family dynamics start to come in. Now, before I tell you the rest of the story, I just want to throw this out there. Don't get mad at me, all right? Don't get mad at me for pointing out this story during the Christmas season. Matthew's the one that brought it up, all right? Matthew's the one that wants you to remember that this is part of the story of Jesus. So, Tamar, she hears at one point that Judah and his clan, they're going to be taking all their sheep to Timnah in order to have their sheep sheared, which is really complicated tongue twister to say, by the way. Sheep sheared. And along the way is a town called Enaim. And so Tamar decides to go to Enaim, in between these two cities, so that she can get Judah's attention, and she puts on the clothes of a prostitute, as well as a veil, so that Judah will not recognize her. Somehow, one way or another, she gets Judah's attention, Judah gets her attention, he approaches her, and we're told at that point that Judah tells her, "Come now, let me sleep with you." To which she's like, "Okay, but what are you going to pay me? What's the payment here for me for this happening?" And he promises her, "I'm going to give you a goat. I'm going to give you one of my goats." To which she's thinking, yeah, right. I know how this works. Like, I've just experienced this with you. I'm going to need some assurances. And he's like, "Well, what do you want? What can I give you as assurance that I will give you a goat after this happens?" And she's like, "I want your driver's license and your credit card." Actually, she asks him for basically the equivalent of his driver's license and his credit card in that time. She's like, "I want that seal that you wear on a necklace around your neck. Your seal that when you, sign things, we know that's your seal. And I want your staff." Because at that time, these men would go around with staffs that signified, like, this staff belongs to this person, so that everybody knew that these things belonged to Judah. So Judah agrees. He's like, "Sounds like a good plan. Let's do it." He gives her those things. They sleep with one another, and then Judah leaves. Eventually, Judah sends back a goat with one of his servants in order to give to this woman. But at this point, she's gone. The servant can't find her anywhere. He has no idea where she is. He begins to ask around the town, and they're like, "We don't know what you're talking about. There's never even been a prostitute here in this town. No clue what you're talking about." Because Tamar at that point had gone back to her home to become a grieving widow. Once again, she takes off the clothes of a prostitute, we're told, and she puts on the clothes of a grieving widow again. But lo and behold, Tamar is now pregnant. And when her family finds out that she is pregnant, of course, they are embarrassed. We got to do something about this. And so her family decides to send a message back to Judah, her father-in-law. They're like, "Hey, your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution. And as a result, she is now pregnant." Now, how do you think Judah responds to this in this moment? I mean, keep in mind, he's well aware of the fact that he's on the naughty list, that he's done some bad things. He left his brother in a pit to die and then sold his brother as a slave for money. He slept with a prostitute. This guy is definitely on the naughty list. And yet in this moment, he becomes furious with somebody else. And so he says, Judah says, bring her out and have her burned to death. To which at this point, I feel the need to pause and just say, Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy Christmas season. Happy Christmas series. Aren't you guys excited about this one? Why in the world are we talking about somebody being burned to death? Again, it's because Matthew's like, hey, don't skip over this. Don't skip over this. This is part of the story of your Savior's birth. Judah was a messy dude. And yet Judah was somebody that was in the line of Jesus' ancestors. So he's like, bring her out. Let's burn her. But Tamar, again, she had a plan. She had the plan all along. And we're told that as she was being brought out, she sent a message to Judah through one of his servants or one of her people. And she's like, hey, I'm pregnant by the man who owns these, right? And he pulls out the driver's license and the credit card, right? I'm pregnant by the man who owns this stuff. Ha ha, missing these, right? She's like, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. And Judah realizes in this moment, oopsie, I messed up. And lo and behold, what does Judah do? He changes his mind all of a sudden. You know what? Let's not burn her because she's carrying my child. She's carrying my offspring. And not just his child, but Tamar was actually carrying twins, Perez and Zerah. And through Perez, Judah and Tamar became part of the lineage of Jesus. Matthew, in this moment, he wants people to remember this story as part of the story of Jesus. But then he just moves right along. Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez, the father of Hezron. Hezron, the father of Ram. Ram, the father of Amminadab. Wonderful names. And it goes on, and we'll look at more of them in the next couple of weeks. But why is this important? I mean, this does not feel like Christmas material, right? This doesn't feel like the kind of stuff we talk about in Sunday school or at church, you know? Some of you in this room, I don't know, I'm looking around. This might not be the case, but some of you might be thinking, I brought my kids in here with me today, Ben. And can I just, if that's the case, can I just say, no offense, but we have some really great kids environments specifically designed for your kids. This is an adult environment. And it's great if you want to bring your kids in here with you, that's fine. But sometimes we're going to talk in here about some adult stuff. And Matthew's like, I don't want you to miss this. Why did he include this scandal in this story of good news, of great joy for all people? Because this story of good news of great joy for all people is the story of Jesus, the Messiah, the King, who came for and who came from people that are on the naughty list, just like you and just like me. In fact, we're going to discover over the next few weeks that God went out of his way to use the naughtiest of the naughty to introduce the nicest of the nice, or to be more accurate, to introduce the most perfect human that has ever existed in all of history. And again, you would think that God would have used somebody like Joseph, the guy who saved his entire family, but he didn't. He used Judah and Tamar. And of all the gospel writers that wrote their 4 gospels, I think the reason that Matthew is the one, he's the only one that included this whole list of people. I think the reason that Matthew included this list of naughty people, and the reason that Matthew wants us to pause as we read through that otherwise boring list of names, is because that's Matthew's story. Matthew was a guy that was on the naughty list. He was a tax collector in his time, which at that time, tax collectors were considered traitors to their people. They were literally thieves. They would steal from their own people on behalf of the Roman government. And think about this. On the day that Jesus approached Matthew, Jesus knew exactly who he was. He knew he was a traitor. He knew he was a thief because he would have obviously known as he approached his tax collector booth that he was a tax collector. And Matthew in that moment expected Jesus to approach him with from a place of hate, a place of disgust, a place of disappointment, because that was all Matthew had experienced his entire life. And yet Jesus approached Matthew that day, and he said the last thing Matthew expected. He said, "Follow me. Follow me." Now, at this point in the ministry of Jesus, Jesus has already invited other men to follow him, men like Peter and Andrew and James and John, the good old boys of the Jewish faith. He's already invited these guys, and as Matthew's like, "Hey," or as Jesus is like, "Hey, Matthew, follow me," Peter probably in that moment is like, no. No, if you're going to invite him, I'm out, right? Matthew was like the kid that would have been picked last for dodgeball. It's like Jesus picked him first. Like, let's go. It's like finding out in this moment, for Peter, it would have been like finding out in this moment, Jesus has just invited a Broncos fan to come follow him. I'm out. Like, that would have been very, very difficult. In fact, in that day, nobody wanted Matthew following them around. That would have been like today, an IRS agent following you around. And nobody wants the IRS following them around, right? You guys know what this is like. Anybody, you ever get like a letter in the mail that says IRS in the corner? You know what I'm talking about? I hate opening those things. Listen, I'm sure all you good people out there, you don't have anything to hide, just like I don't, but you see that letter and you're like, oh, great. Now I'm going to have the IRS following me around, right? And now that this is recorded and going online, I'm probably going to have the IRS following me around. The IRS, I don't know if you know this, the IRS does not send Christmas cards. Okay? And so when you get that mail, it's like, oh no. Nobody wanted Matthew following them. Nobody invited people like Matthew to follow them. And on that day, everything changed for Matthew. We're told that Matthew got up and followed Jesus. And do you know what happened? It didn't happen that day. It didn't happen over the next few weeks. Probably didn't even happen over the next few months. It took days, months, years. It didn't happen overnight. But eventually Matthew changed. And once all of these events that Matthew was a part of were over, he was invited to follow Jesus. He heard Jesus give the Sermon on the Mount. He, writes all this down. He sees Jesus perform all these miracles. He sees Jesus die on a cross. He sees for himself the empty tomb and sees a resurrected Jesus with his own eyes. After all that was over, and all of that, by the way, began with an invite, Matthew's like, I got to write this down. It all began with an invite towards him, not to believe something. He didn't say, hey, Matthew, believe this. Hey, Matthew, change your life. He said, Matthew, follow me. Follow me. And Matthew in that moment, I'm sure, was thinking, why me? Why me? A dishonest pawn of the Romans. And it was because of something that the reason it was why him was because of something that Jesus said that exact same day that he gave him that invite to follow. Later on that day, Jesus said something that is so relevant and so important. And maybe this is what some of you in this room, you need to hear this Christmas season over the next few weeks. This is the message that you need to hear more than any other. When Jesus was asked, Jesus, why are you surrounding yourself with a bunch of Matthews? He said, I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Every single person that Jesus invited before Matthew and every single person that he has invited since then is a sinner, like Matthew, and like me, and like you. And I think if Matthew could be in this room right now and he could talk to you and to me, I think what he would say to you and he would say to me is, hey, listen, we have two things in common. Every single one of us in this room, we have two things in common. The two things that we all have in common, you're on the naughty list. You're on the naughty list. You're a sinner. But also, just like me, you're invited to follow Jesus. And if you do that, you will be changed for the better. That's why we say around here all the time, following Jesus, following his way, like learning about Jesus and following him will make you better at life. Not perfect. Certainly will not make you perfect at life. It certainly will not make your life perfect. It'll make your life better, and it will make you better at life. And here's why. Because when you follow the way of Jesus, when you put your faith, your trust, your confidence in Jesus, you become more like Jesus. You become a better spouse, husband, wife. When you follow the way of Jesus, you become a better friend. When you follow the way of Jesus, you become a better employer or employee, a better neighbor, a better brother or sister. You just become a better person. Again, better. Not easy. Doesn't mean life is easy. Doesn't mean life is perfect. It just means life is better. Because Jesus himself told us that he offers to you and to me, he offers us abundant life. He offers us a way forward that is the way that God created you to live, the way that God created you and me to love. And if you will follow the way of Jesus, you will be forever changed. But again, Matthew is not done with his list of who's naughty or nice. So we're going to pick it up right there again next week. Will you pray with me? God, thank you that Matthew's version of the Christmas story, thank you that it points out to us that it does not matter what we've done, that regardless of what we've done in the past, regardless of what we will do in the future, regardless of what we may be planning to do later today, the fact that there are people in your list, in your lineage, that were definitely without question on the naughty list, and we are right there as well. Thank you that regardless of all of that, that you offer grace. That's why you came. That's the whole point of why you came to this earth. The thing that we celebrate at this time of year is you coming to earth, and the reason you did that was to save and redeem and heal naughty people, broken people, sinners just like me. All of us that are on the naughty list, and every single one of us in this room are included, even though it may be hard for us at times to admit that. So God, we're grateful for it. And God, I pray that over the next few weeks and today, this afternoon even, God, I pray that you would help us to say yes to that invite, just like Matthew said yes to the invite that you gave him to follow you. I pray that you would help us to do the same thing, that you're extending that invite to follow you to every single person in this room. So God, I pray that you would help us to say yes to that invite and follow you today, this week, this month, and for all of our lives. We love you, Jesus. We pray it all in your name. Amen.